The truth is, it was not always this easy for me to step up in front of people and talk about my mixed heritage. In fact, as a kid, growing up in a tribal community, carrying the last name Gong, attending the all-white public school, and then looking the way that I do. By the way, I still don't know what that means. I became aware really early on that people were paying really careful attention to the way I walked, the way I talked, the basketball court that I played at recess, the lunch table that I sat at, even the future that I envisioned for myself, for meaning about my racial identity. And I knew that because just by being my natural self, by exercising what I inherited from my grandma, my grandpa, and my parents, I was constantly throwing people off. How many of you guys have heard this question before? What are you? Raise your hand. I see a lot of hands going up. Yeah, what are you? And it's cousins. Where are you from? No, you know what I mean. Where are your parents from? How did that happen? You know, yeah. And so during the time when I just wanted to know what lunch table to sit at, I was constantly having to justify and defend my family history. And that was really frustrating for me. By the way, Barack Obama, in Dreams of My Father, said that navigating his mixed heritage evoked a fitful inner struggle. How many of you work with kids? I know we're at NIEA, so I know it's going to be a lot of folks. Well, you know, if Barack Obama describes navigating his mixed heritage like that as a person with a relative amount of privilege, you got to be asking yourself, how are your kids experiencing it on the playground or at the lunch table? By the way, and also since I mentioned Barack Obama, I have a fun fact for you guys that are more like a trivia question. Do you know who the first self-identified person of color in the White House was? Whoa! Somebody got it for the very first time. Denny Hurtado has got it. Charles Curtis. Is he looking at my notes down there? Yeah, Charles Curtis was the 35th Vice President of the United States. He was Native American, and guess what? He was throwing people off too. Because his most famous quote, the thing that he is most noted for, is the way he answered that question, what are you? He said, I'm part Kaw, 100% conservative. So it doesn't matter whether you're Barack Obama, or Charles Curtis, or myself, or the kids that you work with. Over time, if you're constantly being asked questions that sort of translate as, why are you here? You start to internalize it and think, well, if I'm constantly throwing people off, maybe I am a little peculiar. Or maybe I am a little weird. Maybe I am not fully anything. And as a kid, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you have no idea that you're bumping up against the politics of race. And when I was a kid, I wish I had known. You know, I wish my teachers had known. Maybe then somebody could have pointed at those experiences that I was having and say, Lou, it's not your fault. It's not your deficit. The deficit lies with our schools and our communities and our institutions because of the rigid way that we continue to apply these simplistic Western ideas about race. And here's what I mean. Tim Wise, he's an activist and a scholar doing work around race, racism, and white privilege. And one time, when he was asked that question, what is race? He answered like this: it's a trick. He said, it's a trick. And let me explain what I mean, because I definitely don't want to say that race isn't important or that it doesn't impact every aspect of our daily lives or that we don't need it to build solidarity around so we can all come together like this and build a collective voice. I'm not saying that. What he's saying is that in this country, over the last 200 years, we've been conditioned to think that race has something to do with science. Just think of the terminology we use. 1/2, 1/4, breed, quantity, dilution. So race, as we use it in this country, really developed around the time that this country was born to solve a problem. And the problem was that although this country was being branded as being based in freedom, the whole economy at that time was based in what? Slavery, right? And rapid expansion over top of native peoples. So how at the same time can you have a country based in freedom and have some people who have different rights and privileges than others? pretty obvious contradiction. So the answer was to brand race as science, and therefore something fixed and unchanging. After all, if black people naturally lack industriousness, and that's never going to change, then it's probably okay that we tell them what to do. And if Native people are naturally uncivilized and they're never going to figure out how to work the land, then it's probably a good thing that we are able to dispossess them of the land. The Office of Management and Budget itself, that's the federal office that decides what racial categories go on the census, acknowledges that race has no anthropological or biological basis. And that makes sense too, because the race categories in the census change every year. You know, mulatto, half-breed, Mexican, Hindu, they've all been racial categories in the past. Yet in this country, it doesn't matter what community you live in, we still rigidly cling to those outdated notions of race, so much so that anybody who challenges those traditional definitions of authenticity is met with resistance.